Welcome back to the Gains for Girls podcast. Today's episode is a special one because it is International Women's History Day. Never a day that I celebrated prior to us as women being told by the people leading this country, make no mistake, by our leaders in corporate America and academia, and virtually in every realm, that men make the best women. So I certainly see the importance of highlighting and honoring real women when it is real women who are due to be honored and celebrated. But let's be real, identity politics is a silly game. It's a dangerous game, actually, in general. I think a whole month dedicated to celebrating women's history is just as silly as a whole month dedicated to celebrating Black history. These are really just ways to continue to further divide us as a nation, as people. We're all Americans. We all bleed red. But anyways, I figured I would take this episode today and share, I guess, kind of the how I got here again. It has been just about 2 years. This national championships is approaching. That's actually taking place at University of Georgia. That would mark the 2-year mark since the whole Lia Thomas debacle, formerly Will Thomas, of course, right? So I figured I would share this story again because I think it's important. I think it's important for people to realize not just what we faced in terms of the unfair competition, but what we faced in terms of the locker room aspect, what we faced in terms of the silencing aspect, and how this really continues to go on, and how this transcends beyond just this issue in particular. And it really has transcended into an infringement upon our First Amendment rights, our freedom of speech. So background here, I started swimming when I was 4 years old, graduated when I was 22. So of course, this means I dedicated really 18 years of my life to my sport. It's impossible to put into words. And those athletes watching this, the parents of athletes watching this, former athletes, you know, right? It's impossible to put into words the amount of time and the hours and the dedication and the sacrifices that you have to make to be willing to compete and ultimately be successful, especially at the highest level. But I was willing. I knew I had to do these things. And so, by the time I was 8 years old, I was practicing every single day. Middle school rolls around, you're practicing before school, you go to school, straight from school, you go back to practice. You did your homework, ate your dinner, went to bed, did it all again the next day. You don't get to go on family vacations because God forbid you took one day out of the water. Michael Phelps is known for saying that swimming is one of those sports where one day out of the water, it takes you 3 days to get back to where you were. So if you took a week off at family vacation, it'd take you 3 weeks to get back to the point you were at before vacation. So none of that, no time out of the water. You don't get to go to prom with your friends because guess what? You have practice, you have a meet that same day. Same thing, no sleepovers on Friday nights, practice at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. So, but again, all of that to say, I was willing to do this. Flash forward to being recruited for college. Truth be told, I was pretty heavily recruited. If you don't know, I come from a family of athletes. My father, he was an SEC football player. My mom played softball. My oldest sister played softball. She ended up going to Ole Miss. My brother's in college playing football now. My little sister, she's probably the best athlete of my whole family. And I would never tell her this, so I hope she's not watching. But she's a gymnast, and she will certainly be competing in college when it's time for her. So I come from a family of athletes. All my uncles played in Super Bowls and won Super Bowls and crazy stuff. So playing sports was never really an option for me. But anyways, flash forward to college. I'm starting to get recruited. I'm biased. The SEC is the best conference, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. Ended up taking a trip to University of Kentucky, kind of on a whim, but I fell in love with the university. Never really where I saw myself. I saw myself somewhere the likes of Florida, right? A school that's historically known for their pretty dominant women's swim team. But I went to Kentucky and I fell in love. I really felt God tugging me to ultimately go to Kentucky. And looking back, there could not have been a better place for me. I love the team. I love the coaches. I love the resources that were being poured into us outside of even just athletics, how they poured into our academics, into our community service and our stewardship, all things that really mattered to me. And so ended up going there freshman year. I thought I worked hard before. I was wrong, because this was a different kind of working hard. We trained 6 hours every day, right? So 3 hours before 8 a.m. 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., you're in the pool. You go to class, you come back, you practice again from 1:30 to 4:30. You ate your dinner, again, did your homework, iced your shoulder, went to bed, did it all again the next day. So lots of adjustment during my freshman year. Sophomore year rolls around, and I was really having a breakout season. I developed a sense of consistency, that a consistency among my diet, consistency among my sleep schedule, among my attitude, even within my personal relationships. I just tried to be a very consistent person, which paid off. But about 3 days before we were supposed to leave for our national championships in March of 2020, our coaches pull us out of the water, take us back to the team room, sit us down. My coach said, "Look, if you live in the dorm rooms, pack your stuff up. You have to leave campus tonight." Of course, COVID had hit. We didn't really know what this meant at the time. There was a lot of uncertainty surrounding this. And so for all I knew, I thought we would go home for maybe the weekend or potentially the week, but we'd be able to come back to campus pretty soon. Everything would be back to normal. But that was naive to think, because upon going back home to Nashville, Tennessee, there were no pools open. There were no gyms open. But fortunately, we have an abundance of lakes. And like I mentioned, swimming is not one of those sports you get to take time off. And so I knew if I wanted to continue this breakout season I was having my sophomore year into my junior year, when we were eventually able to come back, I had to keep training somehow. So I put on a wetsuit every single day and swam miles aimlessly in the lake, just hoping and praying that I would continue getting better, which ultimately I did, not to mention the amount of snakes that swam in front of me, or like dead catfish that hit you in your face as you're swimming. Certainly not pleasant. I had this route where I'd jump in the boat dock and I'd swim down to Johnny Cash's house, and I came back, and I did it every single day. But eventually we were able to return to school my junior year, which I did continue this breakout season. Despite the COVID theatrics, which I will be the first person to say that being a college athlete, really being a college student, I would argue being a human during the time of COVID, was miserable, to say the least, in terms of the social distancing and the contact tracing and the mask mandates and the mandatory vaccines, which I understood mandatory did not mean required. And honestly, I say that to say it's really the first time I learned to stand up for myself and say no to authority figures when they told me, "Riley, your team captain, you have to get the vaccine. You're going to be hurting your team if you don't. And you're supposed to be the leader. You don't want to hurt your team, do you?" Of course I didn't. This was my first taste of emotional blackmail, which is important to remember going into my senior year, because honestly, the tactics that they use to force us either into submission or to be coerced were the same my junior and senior year, and two totally unrelated different topics. But anyways, I said no. I thought, I had already had COVID, so I had the antibodies, which I thought was the best form of natural immunity. I was young, I was healthy. Why would I inject myself with a vaccine that we don't know the long-term effects of? Anyways, all that to say, I learned how to stand up for myself. But ultimately, my junior year, this is when I won my first individual SEC title. This is when I led my team to its first ever program SEC title in history. And ultimately, my junior year, I ended up placing 7th in the nation, which I was proud of, right? You're top 8, you're an All-American, it's pretty high honor. But it was right then and there that I placed 7th my junior year that I set the goal my senior year to win a national title, which would of course mean becoming the fastest woman in the country in my respective event. I'm right on pace to achieve this goal. About midway through my senior season, I was ranked 3rd in the nation in the 200 free, trailing the girl in 2nd by a few 100ths, tenths of a second maybe. I knew her very well because, like in most sports, your top tier athletes know of each other, regardless of where you compete, because you've grown up competing against each other. So I knew her very well. But the swimmer who was ranked first in the nation, leading the nation by body lengths, might I add, was a swimmer that I had never heard of before. Neither had my teammates or my coaches. And this is the first time we became aware of a swimmer named Lia Thomas. Keep in mind, we hadn't seen a photo of this person, or else things probably would have been a little more clear. But for all we knew at the time, this was a senior from University of Pennsylvania, leading the nation, which is not historically a school known for producing fast swimmers, leading the nation by body lengths in events ranging from the 100 freestyle to the 200 freestyle, which, if you don't know anything about swimming, think about this in terms of your Olympic runners, because that's like saying your best 200-meter runner is your best marathon runner. They're two totally different systems. That's not what we see, but that's what we were seeing in this person. So scratching my head, talking to my coaches, my teammates, who is this? We had no idea, and we continued to stay in the dark.